Oh, there's Miss Marathon. I see you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Hazel Rudden. I am the publicity co-chair of the Illinois Blue STEM Award, and we have a couple of representatives here from ISLE. I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves. So Heather, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, I'm Heather Cribbs. I'm the other publicity co-chair for Blue STEM.
And hi, I'm Caroline Campbell, and I'm running the Zoom for ISLE today. Thank you.
Great, and we have schools here from across Illinois. We have Western Trails, that's in Carroll Stream. We have Cloverdale Elementary, who's also in Carroll Stream. There's some students here. And then we have Madison, and I am sorry, I don't know which town you're from, but we have Madison with us as well. And we are here today because we have the author of one of our Blue STEM nominated books, Glitch, with us today, Laura Martin. So I'm going to turn to her. She's going to introduce herself, and then we're going to start with questions.
Hi guys, I am super excited to be here. First of all, big apology that I wasn't here the last time we tried to do this. I'm an author, but I'm also a mom of 4. And as a mom of 4 really young kids, 8, 6, 5, and 2, we have a lot of balls in the air and sometimes we drop the really important ones. And so I apologize for that, but I'm really excited to be here today. So prior to being an author, I was a teacher. I taught 7th grade language arts for 6 years in Indiana. And I actually grew up right on the border of Illinois. So I'm super familiar with Illinois. I grew up right on the border of Illinois and Indiana. In fact, my high school's name was Illiana because they just smushed the 2 names together. So I stopped teaching a while back and kind of pursued the author dream and the mom thing full time. So I'm really excited that Glitch is on your list here. So I'm going to do a quick rundown of some of my other books because maybe you didn't hear about them. And if you really enjoy Glitch, which I hope you do, you can go check some of those out as well. So my first book that came out was the Edge of Extinction series. And it's a 2-book series, which is kind of weird, but I actually only wrote 1 book and they said it's too long for middle grade. You need to break it into 2. So if you end up reading Edge of Extinction 1, you're going to want to find book 2 because it's a bad cliffhanger ending that'll make you hate me, but it picks right up in book 2. So the Edge of Extinction is the idea that we brought dinosaurs out of extinction and it went horribly, horribly wrong. It starts 100 years after the entire human race has moved underground. So a girl named Sky and her dad disappeared 5 years ago, and to find out what happened to him, she has to go above ground, but nobody survives above ground anymore because dinosaurs are back. My third book that came out was called Float. It's about a kid named Emerson that floats, but does it really badly, so badly that he has to have all these crazy accommodations like a weighted vest and big iron shoes. He ends up at a camp with a bunch of other kids with weird issues, like the kid who sticks to stuff and can't get unstuck. Hank right here goes invisible and can't control it. Hank is actually one of my favorite characters I ever created. So when they asked me to write a second book to the Float series, I wrote it from Hank's point of view, and it's called Vanishing Act. So they go back to Camp Outlier, where there's a bunch of kids with all kinds of crazy issues, and it's kind of the antics that happen from there. And then my 4th book is called Hoax for Hire. It's about a family whose entire career is just hoaxing people or tricking people. And they specialize in things like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and all kinds of crazy kind of sea creatures. The opening scene of this one is a boy named Grayson, and he is in a sea monster basically costume, and he's going swimming and he's going to trick people. And so he wants out of the family business. He thinks it's ridiculous that he has to dress up as Bigfoot every now and then. And so that's the story that goes from there. And then Glitch is the one I'm going to talk about last. That was my next book. But my most recent one, besides Vanishing Act, is probably The Monster Missions, which is about the idea of what if we ran out of land? Like, what if with very short, notice, the human race had to figure out how to survive either underwater or above the water. And if we did that, what would we kind of discover that's actually in the ocean? Because we know more about space than we know about our own ocean, which is crazy. So what's actually in there? So that's the Monster Missions. Now, Glitch is a book all on its own, and it actually was a lot of firsts for me. It was my first book that ever got a starred review, which is a big, hairy deal for an author like me. But it's also my first book that I did time traveling in, other than Float. With Float, I kind of played around with time travel, and I love time travel. So I was like, I'm going to go all in with Glitch. And it was the biggest headache to write. Let me tell you, once you start messing around with time and your characters are going in and out of time and things are changing, even my editor was like, your book is giving me a headache. And I was like, oh my gosh, me too. Because you have to like figure out, well, they went back in time here. So the story of Glitch, if you're not familiar, if you have not started it yet, is about two kids who are training to be what's called a glitcher. And a glitcher is someone who's born with the ability to time travel. And so the idea for this one came when I was actually teaching, and I gave my students a project, and it was this book. It was called The 100 Photographs That Had Changed the World. It's by Life magazine. They put out this book. And so they had to pick a photograph and then argue whether or not they thought it actually changed the world. So I had all these big historically significant photographs all over the walls of my classroom for weeks, weeks, and weeks. And I was like, you know, guys, if you think about it, history is actually really fragile. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, no, think about it. If you change one little thing in the past, you can really mess up the future. And so my kind of creative brain started going, and I was like, if you want to mess up the future, all you do is you go back to these big historical events that have kind of like created our nation and all these things that we currently enjoy, and you just change a little bit. So I was like, if we ever figure out how to time travel, someone's going to figure that out really quickly and start really messing up history. So the two main characters in here are training to not change history. They're training to catch the people who are trying to change history, who are called butterflies, which sounds very fluffy until you realize that it ties into the butterfly effect. And if you know anything about science fiction, the butterfly effect is the idea that you change one little thing in the past, catastrophic changes in the future. So not only was this a headache because time travel is hard, but I also wrote from two different points of view here. So each chapter flip-flops between Reagan and Elliot's point of view, and they are enemies at the beginning of the book, and you'll have to kind of see what kind of unravels from there. This one was fun because unlike my other books like Edge of Extinction and Float, I got to kind of create the world and make the rules of the world. This one I dealt a lot with the United States history. So I had to do a whole different kind of research other than researching like Bigfoot and dinosaurs and sea monsters and legends and things like that. It was nitty gritty facts of history. So I found myself researching things like, well, when was plastic invented? Would they have had their ears pierced at this time? Because one of the things the glitchers do is they try to spot things that are historically inaccurate, and that's how they catch a butterfly. So if I had to find a historical inaccuracy, I had to know whether it was accurate or not, if that makes sense. So I'm really excited to have Glitch on your list. It's one of my favorite books I've written. I'm petitioning my publisher to let me write a second one because I feel like that's the #1 question I get asked about Glitch, because the publishing world right now doesn't really want us to write series. They want us to write one book and leave a little bit untied at the end so that if it goes bananas and everybody loves it, we can come back and write a book too, which is what I was able to do with Float. So if you guys all love it and you clamor for it, that's when my publisher usually turns around and says, okay, you can write that one, which is so fun. Because I got to tell you, it's more fun to return to a world that I already created than create a whole new world. So I will turn it over to you guys for some questions. I would love to hear what you guys thought, what you guys would like to know, anything about the writing side, the creative side, the time traveling side. I'd love to answer them for you.
All right, Ms. Dubin's class, are you ready?
Hi, my name is Declan, and my question is, when did you start writing books?
I started writing books in, I would say, 3rd grade. My 3rd grade teacher had a box, and she said, if you want to write a book, we'll put them in this box, and anyone who wants to read them can. Now, they were epically bad books. They were about like horses stuck in the mud. But I started writing stories in the 3rd grade, and I really loved it. And I won the Young Author competition in 5th grade. You guys do Young Author at your school at all? So Young Author is a program where you can write and compete, and then the winner gets to go like meet a real author. So our school did that. I got to go meet a real life author in 5th grade, and I went, oh, people like do this for a living. How cool. And so I always kept it in like the back of my mind as something that I like to do. I went to college and I double majored in creative writing and education so that I could be an English teacher. And the whole time I was teaching, I was trying to get a book published on the side because I just really loved it. It was what I did for fun. I like to challenge myself. So I wrote actually an epically horrible book before I wrote Edge of Extinction that will never get published because you have to write a crummy book to learn how to write a better book. So writing actual books, I like trying to get published books. I would say I started in my 20s, but I was writing stories from 3rd grade on. And I feel like that's where I kind of got the knack of how to put a story together.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and my question is, what is your favorite book that you made?
My favorite book that I made, it's probably Float. And the reason is that I took a lot of the stories I heard from my dad growing up and put them in Float. So if you have not ever had a chance to read the author's note in the back of any of my books, always read the author's note. It's one of the things I ask my publisher to always put in, because it's like that moment in Wizard of Oz where Dorothy pulls back the curtain and sees that Oz is just a man. That's what the author note is in a book. We pull back the curtain and go, look, this is how I did it. And so for Float, it's actually a lot of the stories my dad used to tell me about his childhood growing up. My dad was kind of a knucklehead. He like lit lakes on fire, tried to lasso pigs, almost broke his own neck, like did all sorts of these crazy things. And from the time I was really young, I was trying to write my dad's stories down because I knew they were good stories, but I didn't know what to do with them. And then one day I was doing a writing prompt with a student I was tutoring, and I said, what if you had a superhero ability, but it didn't work right? So while she was working on it, I started creating this character named Emerson who floats but does it badly. And I was like, what do I do with Emerson? Oh, I'll just hijack my dad's entire childhood and hand it off to this kid that floats. So I think that's why that's my favorite book that I've written.
All right, Miss Michael's class.
Stand up. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Harrison. How long did it take you to make the book?
Make Glitch?
Yeah.
So I've been on a 1 book a year track ever since I started publishing. And to publish a book a year, you got to kind of get it written in 6 months. And in that 6 months, you get it written, and then the next 6 months is spent like editing it, making it pretty, line edits, all that good stuff. Now, when I say I wrote it in 6 months, I'm a mom of 4. I write during nap time and after my kids are in bed on a good day. Everyone always thinks that it's going to take so long to write a book, but if you can sit down for 30 minutes a day, you can get a book written in 6 months easily. Because like I said, I've got 4 kids, and then with the pandemic, they were home a lot and doing e-learning a lot. So if I got half hour to an hour in a day, I was killing it. There were some days where I only got 10 minutes, but I would say about 6 months to actually get that rough draft hammered out, and then longer because I would send it to my editor. She would take a month to get back to me. It takes a while, a lot of back and forth.
Stand up.
Hi, my name is Austin, and how did you think of all the names in Glitch?
All the names in Glitch. I kind of hijacked them from different places. Now, remember, I was a teacher, and so I had about 160 students every year, and I tend to steal my students' names, my old students' names for characters in my book. The name Reagan was actually a name that my cousin was going to name her little girl and didn't, and I liked it because it had some kind of historical ring to it. And then I just liked the name Elliot. So I kind of pull them from all different places. Sometimes I go through my kids' like class roster to pull last names kind of thing. For Edge of Extinction, the main character's name is Sky, because that's the name I always wanted to name a girl. And then my husband said no, so I gave it to a character instead. So we tend to pull them from all sorts of places.
All right, we have a 5th grader here. Go ahead, Evie.
Hi, my name is Evie, and if you could write a book with any author, who would it be?
Any author, who would it be? I'm currently trying really hard to get a picture book published because I think it's because I have younger kids. I just think that would be really cool. But what's his name? There's an illustrator I really want to work with, but I mean, J.K. Rowling would be like the end all be all to write a book with, right? Because I love Harry Potter. So she would be really fun. Rick Riordan would be really fun. If I could get a picture book, I'm actually working with Sherry Rinker, who wrote Goodnight Construction Site. She's kind of helping me out a little bit. So I've kind of already checked that dream box, which is fun. But I would say those two, J.K. Rowling or J.K. Rowling. She would be my number 1.
Nice, thank you. All right, you ready? We have one more here. And then Miss Dubin, we're back to you next.
My name is Mia, and my question was, did someone or something inspire you to make your characters?
One of the things that we do as writers is we tend to steal the people around us and turn them into characters. And maybe we don't steal the whole person, but we steal like characteristics of people. So I would say my main characters always have a little bit of me in them because I'm writing from that first person. I'm saying, I did this. But for example, I stole some of Reagan has some learning disability issues, and I have a kiddo with some of the similar issues. So I kind of stole those aspects from that and my experience with that to kind of work that into her struggles and her frustrations. And then I just pull different people in my life. I have a younger brother who's now not little anymore, but he's always been a really kind of funny, ornery, sarcastic person. I steal a lot of his personality and put him into characters. And sometimes we put people into characters we don't even realize. In Edge of Extinction, there's a character named Ivan, and it wasn't until after the book came out and everyone's like, you put your grandpa in the book. And I was like, no, I didn't. And then I went back, I was like, I did. I put my grandpa into Ivan. A lot of the things he says, the way he makes fun of people's noses, all sorts of things like that. So a lot of times your life experience comes into the book, whether you expect it to or not. And it's the other people in your life who read it and kind of see those things and go, oh, I see where you got that from. So I'm just pulling from all sorts of places when I write.
All right, thank you. All right, Miss Dubin's class, you're ready?
Hi, my name is Isabella, and my question is, during the process of writing the story, overall, what was the hardest part?
Time travel. I don't recommend writing a time travel book. If you can write about anything else, don't write about time travel. And I love time travel because my favorite movies were like Back to the Future, and I loved the book A Wrinkle in Time when I was a kid. But the hardest part by far was the time travel element, because it was like, if they go back in time and do this, well, does that change when they come back here? And does this change that? Because you're playing with time, which is tricky and you really shouldn't do, as you kind of learn from the book. But by far the hardest part was the time travel. I thought having two narrators was going to be the hardest part, because you have to have very distinctive voices for them. And when I say voice, what I mean is just personality. When a writer writes, they inject their personality into their words. That's called your voice. And when you become a writer, you have your own unique voice, which is such a cool thing. But when you're going to be two characters, you have to have two different voices, which can be a little tricky because you don't want each chapter to kind of sound like the other. They have to sound like two different people in the way they say things and their attitude and all that good stuff.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Ashlyn, and I want to know, how do you choose who illustrates the covers of your books?
I don't get to, but I am very blessed that my publisher has let me kind of pick and choose what goes on the cover. And so they pick the illustrator and say, hey, here's who we'd like to use. I look at their work, I say yes or no. I've always said yes. They've always picked great illustrators. And I've had a few different ones. So for example, Edge of Extinction was done. The covers and the art in these, and there's actually some really cool pictures in these, were done by the same guy. And then they switched and gave me a totally different artist for Float. And then the sequel to Float had a totally different artist, but he had to try to match the style so they would look the same. And then Hoax for Hire was probably my favorite artist to work with, because he emailed me and he said, I read the whole book cover to cover. My kids all love your books. And so he nailed the cover first try. Because a lot of times when artists do your cover, they're just working off a description. They have not actually read your book. So some things don't quite turn out right. So for example, in Edge of Extinction, they had a character in a whole different costume that he wasn't supposed to be in, and we had to switch it. But the guy who did Hoax for Hire read the whole book and got it right the first time. And then the guy who did Edge of Extinction also did Glitch and the Monster Mission. So those have kind of a similar look to them. So that was really fun to have him back.
Great. Thank you. Miss Michael's class?
Rory, come on up.
What caused Reagan and Elliot to hate each other?
I feel like it's just one of those things. There's always, at least when I was growing up, there's always, if you're a competitive person, and I'm a very competitive person, you tend to always have those people who you think you're competing with, even if they're really not. Like, you're always comparing yourself to them. And so Elliot, I think, has this kind of complex of Reagan is the daughter of the commander in chief. So he feels like he's got to prove something. And Reagan's just trying to get by, and she doesn't really understand. And so because Elliot's kind of mean and nasty to her, she kind of just reciprocates. And I feel like a lot of times that just happens as you're kind of going through, especially if you're in a really competitive environment. Like when you get into team sports, someone isn't really your enemy, but if it's your spot on the court or spot on the court, you get this kind of rivalry. And so that's kind of where that came from. I had someone like that growing up, that she was always better than me and always managed to get that spot on the court no matter how hard I worked. And it just, even though she was a fine person, you kind of get that like, ooh, like, you know, competitive edge with them. So that's kind of where that came from.
My name's Gianna, and I have a question. If you were to write a sequel to Glitch, what event in history would you visit?
Oh, it would be so fun. I don't know off the top of my head which ones I would visit. It would be fun to research some of the more kind of obscure historical events that maybe aren't in all the history books, and kind of do that and kind of play around with some of the ones that everybody hasn't heard of and bring some of those historical events to light. Plus, the less we know about a historical event, the more I can fill in with my imagination, which is always easier. When something's super well documented, you have to be careful to make sure that you get all those facts correctly. So I don't know. I haven't really explored that yet, but it would be a really fun thing to go back in history and kind of play around with.
All right, thank you. We have a fifth grader here.
Hi, my name is Dina, and what inspired you to be an author?
I've always been a reader. I always felt like there was magic in a book. And I was like, I want to know if I can create this. You know, it's that I want to see if I can do it kind of mentality. And so I started reading at a really young age. I fell in love with like the Chronicles of Narnia. And then right around 4th or 5th grade, I switched to audiobooks because I was busy and always on the go. And I listened to so many audiobooks. And I really think that that's what made me a writer, because when the words go in here versus through your eyes, you get those language patterns better. There's actually some weird science behind that, that if you listen to it, you can become a better writer than if you just read it. Because when you read, you kind of start to skim as you get to be a better reader. And so I just wanted to create that. I wanted to see if I could do it. I loved the idea of getting a book published, and just kind of became one of those dreams I wanted to chase, and got between my teeth, and I wasn't willing to let it go until I made it happen.
All right, Grace, you ready?
Hi, my name is Grace, and I was wondering what age did you like start to write? Know that you
Pretty
wanted
into this one, I started back in 3rd grade. And kind of started playing around. Writing's always been one of those things I did for fun. So it's still one of those things I have to remind myself that it's my job now, because I'm like, oh no, I can't do that till I like get all my things done that I have to get done. I'm like, no, this is your job. That has to go in front of the laundry. That has to go in front of these other things. So I started writing really young, right around 3rd grade. My spelling has always been atrocious, will remain atrocious my entire life. But thank goodness for spell check, because now that I don't have to handwrite things, people can actually understand what I'm writing.
All right, Miss Dubin's class, we have time for at least one question, maybe two. So if you guys want to go ahead.
Okay. My name is Holly. What is your favorite genre?
Favorite genre to read is fantasy. Obviously, my favorite genre to write is probably science fiction, since every one of my books is science fiction. But I love reading fantasy. Fantasy is probably my favorite, but I always kind of switch between fantasy and science fiction. Now that I'm a mom, I do a lot of nonfiction reading, just because I'm trying to figure out how to be a better mom and be a better writer and better person. Plus, I'm one of those people who is kind of a book addiction. And if I start a really good book, I ignore everything else. And like the laundry piles up, the kids' homework doesn't get taken care of. So I try to not do a really fun fiction book unless I have time to really sit down and, you know, disappear into it for a few days. So I read a lot of nonfiction now, but fantasy and science fiction.
All right, Miss Dubin's class, you have one more question for us? Awesome.
Hi, my name is Claire, and my question is, are there any books that you wrote that you don't like?
I don't think so. I think by the time they hit the shelf and they're published, we've worked them into a shape that I really like. My publisher did want me to write something that I didn't want to write, and I said no, and I almost didn't get the contract. The book that I'm working on now, I don't know how much I want to give away, but it's about the idea of this family who can go in and out of board games, but when they go into a board game, something comes out. And so they wanted me to turn it into a book about video games and about going in and out of video games. And I said a hard no on that one. If you read Float and you read Vanishing Act, I'm a big believer in adventures in the real world and not in video games. And so I said, I'm sorry, I can't write this book. It's like against everything I believe in. And so it took, and so you're going to see that I don't have a book coming out this next summer. And it's because of that lapse of going back and forth with my publisher, trying to figure out what book they would let me write, because I didn't want to write the book they wanted me to write. So that was kind of my one time I was like, I can't write that book. I'm sorry. Plus, I know nothing about video games. It would be the most like not realistic book in the world, because the last time I played video games was like Mario Kart when I was in middle school.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you to Laura Martin for taking the time to talk to our readers today. And thank you to all the students who participated, who asked such amazing questions. And school, like teachers, you can unmute and you guys can say your goodbyes. So go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Enjoy Glitch and vote for it.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you again.
We love the book. Thank you. Definitely write a sequel.
Thank you. And it's on audio, guys. So if you don't have a chance to read it, you can listen to it on audio, and it's really great on audio. They have 2 different narrators for each character.
Oh, cool.
I listened to it on audio. It was awesome. Thank you,
I
guys.
will. Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.